Hi, Lydia. This is Rich. Can you hear me?
I can.
Hi. So I'm talking today with Lydia Herrera, who has a great book about ADHD. It's tell us about your book.
Well, Rich, when my son was in kindergarten, he was diagnosed with ADHD and learning disabilities. And through the process of trying to learn how to work with him and help him to cooperate and be a contributing member of our family, I started connecting with other moms. Um, and they would always ask me, well, how are you doing with your son? What is it that you're doing? Why is he being successful and so on? And before long, it became pretty clear that I had a good message. And one of my good friends, whose grandson is ADHD. One day she just looked at me and said, "Lydia, you need to write a book." And
Hmm.
and I kind of chuckled because it was like, what? Out of the blue. But she planted the seed, and before long, I realized that yes, there are a lot of parents out there who aren't sure what to do for their child, and yet their child is driving them crazy. So I put together our book. It's basically our story. It's our family story of raising our son. But in the story, I have a lot of strategies, ideas, different ways for a mother, especially, but both moms and dads, to be able to succeed in parenting. Because you know as well as I do, this is an amazing challenge, and it just takes all you've got, and you have to be able to find ways to make it work without losing your own sense of self worth.
Or sanity.
Yeah, that too.
So one of the messages that I see throughout is this message of hope. Do you think that a lot of parents of kids with ADHD feel hopeless?
You know, when you're raising a child that is uncooperative in school, the teachers don't know what to do, the IEP isn't very effective, and then the child comes home from school and he's driving you a little on the crazy side. You don't know what to do with homework. They're uncooperative. They're bouncing off the walls. They don't have any friends. You know, yes, it comes to a point where you really wonder, what does the future hold for my child? And when you see your child the way he is today, you kind of imagine that he or she is going to be that way as an adult, and it's kind of scary.
Sure.
And you know, you look at adults around you, and it's really hard to imagine what your child is going to be like, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. And yes, it can be very scary for parents.
And your child is an adult now, though, correct?
He is. Our son is 26. He is a college graduate, and he is having a real productive, positive, happy life. And I have to say, it's we had hope.
Yeah, well, and it sounds like that hope was well founded, right?
We really worked with him and found ways to help him establish skills as well as ways to channel his energy so that he was able to stay focused, and you know, it worked.
Now, you had mentioned in your website about the routines, and you have a whole post about using routines. Is that a key feature of being able to effectively deal with kids?
Well, you know, one of the things about routines for anyone actually is once you set up a routine and it becomes habitual, then you don't have to think about it so much. And you don't have to make decisions constantly about what you're going to do with homework and when you're going to brush your teeth, or when you're going to get ready for bed, and when you're going to do a chore. And so if we can help our children to be able to establish some routines that are real easy, and they're every day. And the whole family does this. This is what we do in our family. We come home from school, we have a snack, we play outside, we have dinner, and then we do homework. And if you have those routines where that's how things go every day. The other thing is getting ready for bed. As adults, we tend to kind of want to lighten up for the weekends. But, our kids need those routines. They need to go to sleep at a certain time. They need to know they're going to be eating at certain intervals. Those kinds of things are really important for our ADHD kids. They function better. And when we realize that that is just how it's going to be in our family, and you accept that and you run with it, our children really do respond a lot better.
Now, you opened your book with a statement about courage, and I think that kind of goes hand in hand with hope. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, one of the things that I think all parents probably experience this, but especially parents of children with ADHD, is you have to be strong. You have to be willing to be firm. You have to be willing to be consistent. And that takes a lot of courage, because you are going to have to make some changes in your own life that are going to benefit your child. And sometimes it takes more courage than we would like. Sometimes I say, parenting isn't for wimps.
Yeah.
And it really isn't. We have to be willing to do what needs to be done when it needs to be done. And that takes courage, but it also takes confidence. If we're not confident that we can handle our children well, and that when they try to wear us down, when they don't want to cooperate, when they are ready to just take off and we've got to go after them and bring them back, it takes confidence to do that, especially when you're with other people, because they're watching you.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we lack courage because we're wondering what the other people think about us. But we shouldn't do that. We're here for our child, and we should know. And with confidence and with courage, we do know what's best for our child. And that's what we should have the courage to do all the time.
That's really interesting, and I think a very profound statement. I would agree that oftentimes, and especially in public, we as parents tend to act in ways that we think people expect us to act, and maybe not in the best interest of our children, especially at that particular time. So I can certainly understand that. So
we have to be a little unconventional.
Oh, absolutely.
And other parents don't understand. And other family members and grandparents, they're watching us and they're wondering, what the heck are you doing? And yet it is the best thing for our child.
So one of the things I've got 3 kids with ADHD myself, and one of the things that I've seen in those kids is self-esteem issues. Is that something that you saw with your child as well?
Yeah, I did, and I was a teacher and a school administrator for many years, and several of those years I was actually working at schools, special schools for at-risk students. And one of the things that I noticed is when students have a hard time having friendships, because their behavior can be very sporadic, and they really don't have a good filter on how their behavior or their words are going to affect other people. Then they'll do something that's really off the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone's looking at them like, holy Toledo, or the responses are negative. And that also happens with us as parents. When our kids are driving us crazy, it's very easy to lose control. It's real easy not to be patient. It's easy to say things, or nonverbal communication that speaks negative. It's a negative message. And I mean, really, our kids are getting those negative messages all the time. So you know that it's going to affect their self-esteem. And so it's really important that we as parents do what we can to train them, because that's what it's all about, right? We're training them to act appropriately in certain situations. We're training them to control their energy as best they can. You know, there's a lot of training going on. And so we have to discipline and rein them in a lot, but we also, it's so important that we also give them positive reinforcement. You
Mm-hmm.
know, those comments that speak love, those looks, the eye to eye contact, the smiles, the pat on the back, just a little comment. Oh, I really like the way you did that. You know, those things to us, they seem like inconsequential, but for them, it could be the highlight of their day. And sometimes we don't even realize that what we've done is having such a wonderful effect on them.
Or the opposite. I think a lot of times we don't realize that the things we say or do or the way we react has a negative effect on them, and that's something that I think we have found ourselves in my family as well as um, inadvertently, I think, helping to um, have a negative self-esteem just by, in the way that we kind of and at least in my opinion, the way that we've seen in giving them what we call the digas, right? Did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do this? I think we call it digititis in our house, right? It's like this syndrome that we parents have that we can't say anything without starting it with did you. But I think that we've kind of found that out. That almost implies a lack of trust, and so that's something that we've tried to be very cognizant about not doing. Do you think parents are a contributing factor in negative self-esteem in these kids?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, think about what we go through every day. You know, you experience it, I experienced it. Um, just about everything our kid does is bothersome, you know, and they bug you, and you told them 10 minutes ago not to do that, and yet here they're doing it. So yes, it's very easy for a real quick snap comment, but they dig deep, and because it's not, we don't mean it in that way, so we don't think our child takes it in that way, but they do. And though, especially the younger ones, even teens, but you know, when you're talking about a 6, 7, 8-year-old, they soak that up. And so if there's more negative coming at them, they're soaking up the negative more so than the positive.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. Now, I would say over time, and the research that I've done has shown that ADHD prevalence has continued to rise in the U.S. and in the world around us. I think there's estimates now at 15 million people just in the U.S. and 6.4 million of those are kids, and those numbers continue to rise like 5% a year. What do you think is contributing to that?
Well, I think awareness, but also I think there's kind of a culture maybe that we want our children to be little adults. You know, we want them to sit still. We want them to focus. You know, we'd like for them to be model students in the classroom. That speaks about our own self-esteem, and so we tend to want that to happen. But when we have a child that doesn't fit that mold, it's very easy to immediately go to a label. And so much of what is considered a symptom or an indicator of ADHD, especially in younger children, are really kid kind of stuff. You know, kids do crazy stuff. They can't sit still. They're hyper. They're excited about life, and so they're just really jumping around and having a good old time. But we would like for them to be a little calmer, and I think there's to a certain extent, and please don't take this wrong. I'm not accusing parents of not caring about their child, but I do believe that there are a lot of students, young people, who are being diagnosed when in fact strategies and even diet, exercise, natural remedies could help. And I'm real concerned when a parent takes their child to a pediatrician and gets a prescription right off the bat without trying anything else beforehand. ADHD is real. You and I know that. But there are a lot of degrees, and some people are major ADHD, and others not so much. So I think there's a quick there's a desire for a quick fix, and the quick fix is usually medication.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have concern for that, especially for the really young children that are being put on medication.
Well, I would say that, in some cases, medication is called for. There are people with really strong symptoms that really need that kind of thing. But I would agree that, it seems like that's almost the first step that you take, or that parents take, as opposed to one of the last steps that parents take. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and just recently I was doing some research on food dyes, and it's fascinating how the chemical food dyes, not the natural food dyes, but the chemical food dyes can affect our children. Sugar, it depends on who you read and what you look at. Sugar sometimes is a big deal for ADHD, and sometimes it's not. It just depends on who's writing the article, I guess. But I do believe that there are some things in our environment. They could be chemicals in our home. But I noticed with our son, dairy was huge, and the food dyes. The sugar somewhat, but I'll tell you, the food dyes were unbelievable for him, and they still are. And he still has issues with dairy as well. We can always tell when he's had too many pizzas.
Well, and that's fascinating, because my youngest daughter, she's 8, and she is extremely sensitive to food dyes. And we've found that she's okay with like yellow food dye, but if she gets a red or a blue food dye, she's an entirely different child for 36 hours afterwards. And it's extremely clear when that happened. And we went through, like with the Feingold diet, trying to isolate the different things that were causing issues. And we found that it was that. And there was there's an additive called vanillin, which is an artificial vanilla flavor. And anything with that in it, if she eats anything like that, which comes in like the cheaper chocolates that you find in the US that they don't allow in the rest of the world, that vanillin, when she has anything with that, it's lights out for the next day and a half. She's a wild child. So it's interesting that you've had that same experience. It's the first time that I've met another parent that's had that same experience with the food dyes.
Yeah, and I suspect that there are a lot of kids that are bouncing around because they have had, the little Slurpee, or the, who knows what all is out there anymore, and an awful lot of food dyes.
And
I read
parents
an article.
think it's the sugar that's causing it, and maybe the food dyes itself, and these chemicals that are in our food that weren't there many years ago, and maybe that's what's causing it.
Well, and you think about all the processed foods that we eat, the macaroni and cheese, and everything that comes in a box practically, and a can. There are some preservatives in there that can cause some issues as well. So when we talk about diet, I think it's really important for parents to be as natural as possible. And I know that takes more time,
and
to
expense.
plan the meal and to prepare the meal, but it's so much better actually for the whole family, but especially for our children.
Yeah, we're the same way. I mean, we've gone to an all organic and whole food type diet here with our house, and you know, I would say everybody is healthier for it. And but you know, it's a challenge to try to not use the processed foods, and it can be expensive as well. But I mean, you know, the changes that we've seen in our kids have been at least in my youngest, have been well worth it. I mean, it was just, it was a nightmare until we were able to kind of isolate that stuff down. Now, have you had any experience with the Feingold diet? Are you familiar with that at all?
When I was a teacher many years ago, there were a few children in our school who were on the Fine Gold diet, and I was a little bit familiar about it then. But to having used it myself, or really close contact with someone who has, no, I have not. But I understand that it is an excellent diet.
So, if you had one parenting tip of for parents who have kids out there with ADHD, if you had one piece of advice, the most important piece of advice you could give them, what would that be?
I think the most important thing that parents can do for their children is to um, grow their own confidence so that they're not second guessing themselves. And that would include finding strategies that are going to work for their child, whether it's helping them with schoolwork or discipline or routines. Uh, uh, Having the courage and the confidence to grow their own knowledge so that they do what's right for their child. And that means confidence, firmness, and consistency. And I find with parents that I work with that consistency is the big deal. You know, they'll do it for a couple of days, or, you know, they do it now, but half hour, the kids, you know, kind of worn them down, and so they don't do what they need to do. So those are really important. But there's one more thing that I think is really important too, and that's self-care. Um,
For the parent.
yes, yes. It's real easy to get burned out when you're running a mile a minute trying to do the best that you can for your child. And I find that a lot of parents, especially moms, get really burned out because they're not doing what they need to do for themselves. And so that's one of the things that I work with my moms, especially, just making sure that they're taking care of themselves. Because if they get burned out, if they get sick, the whole family falls apart, and then you can no longer be effective for your child.
That's great advice. So we're talking with Lydia Herrera. Help My Child is ADHD, A Journey in Parenting an ADHD Child. And that is your book, and it is available, I think, on Amazon and other locations as well from your website.
Yes, it's on my website as well, lydiaherrera.com.
Thank you so much for your time.
Rich, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.